Hello, here I am again in the name of the sovereign creator of heaven and earth, the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm continuing with my exposition of my translation of Genesis. We've come to chapter 32, Jacob and God. And I'll read first verses 1 through 8. Then Jacob went on his way. That's after dealing with Laban. He went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This camp is God's." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Then Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to Esau his brother, to the land of Seir, the territory of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, "Thus shall you say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and remained until now. I have oxen, donkeys, and flocks, and male and female slaves, and I have sent to tell my Lord that I may find favor in your sight." The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you, and 400 men with him." Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. So he divided the people who were with him into two companies, as also the flocks, the herds, and the camels. And he said, "If Esau comes to one company and attacks it, the other company will escape." I just want to comment on the name Mahanaim. It means two bands. And of course, there was the physical band, that was Jacob's, and there was the spiritual band, that was God's, that was the angels. This, by the way, is the second time that Jacob saw angels. The first was at Bethel, the ladder. Remember that one? Let's read now verses 9 through 21. Then Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Jehovah, who said to me, 'Return to your country and to your family, and I will do you good.' I'm not worthy of all the mercies and all the faithfulness that you have bestowed on your servant. For I crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. You yourself said, 'I will surely do you good, and I will make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude.'" He stayed there that night. Then he took from what he had a present for his brother Esau, 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 colts. He delivered them to his slaves, each drove by itself, and said to his slaves, "Pass on ahead of me and put some space between drove and drove." He commanded the first one, saying, "When my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, 'Whose are you and where are you going? And whose are these in front of you?' then you will say, 'They are your servant Jacob's, who says, I am sending a present to my lord Esau. And behold, he also is behind us.'" So also he commanded the second and the third and all who followed the drove, saying, "You shall speak the same word to Esau when you find him. And you shall also say, 'Behold, your servant Jacob is behind us.' For he said, 'I will appease him with the present that goes before me, and afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me.' So the present went on ahead of him, but he spent that night in the camp." Now I just want to comment here on what I translated in verse 11, "Lest he come and attack me." The Hebrew verb here could have the meaning to kill. But Esau would have no reason to kill women and children, even if he killed Jacob. However, the next verse could imply even the killing of the children. But anyway, that's what I did. Okay, now let's go on to verses 22 through 32. This will have quite a few notes. That same night, he, that's Jacob, arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and brought them across the stream. He had sent over that which he had. He had already done that. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until it began to dawn. And when he, that's the man, saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, that's Jacob's thigh, and Jacob's thigh became out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, "Let me go, for the dawn has come." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked and said, "Please tell me your name." And he said, "Why do you ask my name?" And he blessed him there, and Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, because I have seen God face to face, and I am still alive. And the sun rose on him as he went on from Peniel, and he limped because of his thigh. Therefore the children of Israel do not eat the tendon that is on the hollow of the thigh to this day, because he, that's God, struck the hollow of Jacob's thigh, the tendon. That same night, I take it that Jacob made the crossing at night, which would have been a strange procedure. That is to say, he took his family across, all right. Perhaps God had already presented himself to him, and he knew that he would have to face him alone as he went back. Now, the Jabbok is a small tributary of the Jordan River on the eastern side. The stream could have presented a small obstacle to Esau, who was coming from the south, but to placate Esau, Jacob could not use that strategy. As I already mentioned in verse 23, he had sent over what he had, a good part of his possessions that had already gone toward Esau. Verse 24 says that he was left alone. He must have helped the women and children cross, but then he returned to the north side of the stream alone. And this, we take it that it was God himself who wrestled with Jacob. So God says, "Let me go." Evidently, Jacob was just hanging on to him. Obviously, God limited his strength, otherwise Jacob couldn't have done anything at all. That said, this picture is really curious. Why did God even do such a thing like that? Well, God had a special interest in Jacob, and he wanted to change his name. By wrestling, Jacob lived up to the name of Israel, which means exactly he who struggles with God. But why did Jacob ask for God's name? I don't know. Maybe he wanted confirmation that it was indeed God. Who knows why he asked for the name? Anyway, God didn't tell him. But Jacob knew who it was. He called the place Peniel, which means the face of God. That's what he called it. And furthermore, he said, because I've seen God face to face and I'm still alive. Well, quite right. Normally, you don't survive something like that. So when the sun rose, he was limping. Now we come to chapter 33. I'll read first verses 1 through 7. This is Jacob and Esau. Then Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there was Esau, coming with 400 men. Then he divided his children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 maidservants. He put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children behind, and then Rachel and Joseph last. But he himself passed on ahead of them. He didn't hide, he was in front, and bowed down to the ground 7 times until he came to his brother. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, falling on his neck and kissing him, and they wept. Then he lifted his eyes and saw the women and children and said, "Who are these with you?" And he said, "The children with whom God has blessed your servant." Then the maidservants came near, they and their children, and bowed down. And Leah also came near with her children and bowed down. Then Joseph and Rachel came near and bowed down. Now, I'm going to really comment on a couple of things here. It says here that Esau ran and hugged him and kissed him, and then that they wept. Now, just think about that. Jacob and Esau certainly spoke much more than is recorded in the text. Jacob certainly asked for news of his parents, and it is more than likely that Rebekah was already dead. Sarah died at the age of 127, and Rebekah was at least 120 when Jacob fled, and he'd been away for 20 years. This may explain why Jacob was in no hurry to see his father. I'll explain that later. It is possible that Jacob was bitter toward his father. If Isaac had recognized what God had told Rebekah and the fact that Esau had sold the birthright and had not tried to bless Esau anyway, Jacob would not have gone through the distress and humiliation that he did. As we'll see later, it seems that Isaac was in his last 10 years when Jacob finally did show up. That we'll get there in due time, God willing. Now let's read verses 8 through 17. Then Esau said, "What do you mean by all these droves that I met?" And he said, "To find favor in the eyes of my Lord." But Esau, "I have enough, my brother. Let what you have be yours." Then Jacob said, "No, please, if I have now found favor in your eyes, accept my gift from my hand, since I have seen your face as if I had seen the face of a god, and you are pleased with me. Please accept my blessing that has been brought to me because God has favored me and because I have enough." And he urged him until he accepted it. Then Esau said, "Let us be on our way, and I will go before you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are tender and that I have ewes and cows that are nursing, and if they drive them hard, just one day they will die. Please let my Lord go on ahead of his servant, and I will go on by stages, little by little, according to the pace of the cattle that go before me, and according to the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord at Seir." And Esau said, "Well, then let me leave some of those who are with me with you." But he said, "What need is there? Let me find favor in the eyes of my Lord." So Esau returned that day to Seir by the same road, and Jacob traveled to Succoth, built himself a house, and made shelters for his livestock. Therefore he called the name of that place Succoth. Now, verse 14 ends by Jacob saying that he's going to Seir, but he had no intention of going to Seir. He just wanted to be free from Esau. Thank you very much. Now I need to spend some time on verse 17. Succoth means shelters, as a matter of fact. Just he built the shelters for the cattle, but this is very strange. We do not know how long Jacob stayed in Succoth, but if he built a house for himself, they were used to staying in tents, and made shelters for his livestock. You got to be kidding. When had the livestock ever had shelters? He certainly stayed there for some time, perhaps several years. In fact, attention please, perhaps a good many years, considering Dinah's age. When they arrived in Succoth, Reuben, the firstborn, would not have been more than 13 years old. Chapter 30, verse 21 says that Dinah was born after Zebulun. And Zebulun was Leah's sixth son. So Dinah may not have been even 5 years old by then, because Zebulun was certainly born during the 6 years. Now then, to attract Shechem's attention, we'll get that next video, God willing. She would have had to be a fully developed teenager, probably at least 15 years old. Likewise, furthermore, Simeon and Levi would not have been more than 12 and 11 when they arrived in Succoth. But to do what they did in chapter 34-25, that is, those two massacred all the men of the Shechem, they would have had to be men in their prime to do that. I say that they stayed in Succoth for at least 10 years. But I imagine it was between 13 and 15. I can't prove that. I wasn't there, but that's what I gathered. The time that they spent near Shechem, in a minute, before sacking the city was probably not very long. Now, to finish this video in this chapter, I'll read verses 18 through 20. That was how Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, after he left Paddan Aram, and he camped within sight of the city. And he bought the parcel of land where he had pitched his tent from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he set up an altar there and called it El Elohe Israel. There's two things here. In chapter 31, verse 13, God had told Jacob to return to his native land, which was Canaan, on the other side of the Jordan. And here the text emphasizes that he finally got there. But curiously, he stopped before crossing. And Succoth is on the eastern side of the Jordan. Now this altar, he called it El Elohe Israel. That means God, the God of Israel. So Jacob took his new name, Israel, and claimed a relationship with God. A relationship for himself, but probably for his descendants as well. Okay, that's it for this evening. Thank you very much for watching. God bless.